lost hiker. In the summer of 1995, Daniel and his best friend, Michael, set out for a weekend hiking trip in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. Both of them were seasoned hikers, having tackled several trails over the years. But there was something about the beauty and mystery of the Cascade Mountains that had always called to them. The journey began like any other crisp morning air, the smell of pine and the satisfying crunch of dirt beneath their boots. They had a trail map, enough supplies for a few days, and the energy to explore for hours. Their plan was to hike deep into the forest, away from the beaten path, and camp by a hidden lake that few had ever seen. By noon, they had made good progress, and the path began to narrow as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. The further they walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the eerie silence of nature. After a while, the trail began to fade. "Must be part of the adventure," Daniel had said, half joking. But soon, they noticed something unsettling. The markers that indicated they were on the right path began to disappear. Still, they pressed on, thinking they could find their way to the lake without much trouble. They had a compass, and they knew the general direction. But as the sun began to set, their confidence started to wane. "Should we turn back?" Michael asked, glancing at the sky. Daniel shook his head. "The lake should be just ahead. We'll set up camp for the night and find our way in the morning." They walked a bit further, but the forest only seemed to grow denser, the trees towering above them like silent watchers. When the lights started to dim, they found a small clearing to pitch their tent. A campfire flickered weakly as the night closed in, and an uneasy feeling settled over them. It wasn't just the darkness, it was the sense that something was wrong, that they had ventured too far into a place they weren't supposed to be. As they sat by the fire, the sounds of the night began to change. It wasn't the usual chirps of crickets or rustling of small animals. It was a low, distant hum, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. At first, they tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wilderness playing tricks on their minds. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. It seemed to echo from the forest, surrounding them on all sides. "Did you hear that?" Michael asked, his voice tense. Daniel nodded. "Probably just the wind, man. We're in the middle of nowhere." But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't the wind. The noise had a strange, unnatural quality to it, almost like footsteps. The two exchanged uneasy glances. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the darkness, a branch snapping underfoot. Daniel jumped to his feet, shining his flashlight into the trees. "Nothing. Who's out there?" he called. The forest responded with silence. Michael stood up, gripping a large stick from the fire pit. "Maybe it's an animal." But the footsteps returned slow, deliberate, circling them in the dark. Every hair on Daniel's neck stood on end. Something or someone was out there, watching. "Let's get inside the tent," Daniel whispered. They both backed into the tent, zipping it shut as quickly as they could. The fire outside flickered, casting strange shadows on the tent walls. The footsteps stopped, but the presence lingered. They sat in silence, listening, every nerve on edge. For hours, neither of them spoke, only listening to the eerie quiet. Then, just as Daniel started to drift off to sleep, a soft thud hit the side of the tent. He jolted awake, heart pounding. The thud came again, this time louder. "What is that?" Michael whispered. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light for him to see what had made the noise. Lying just a few feet away from the tent was a small pile of stones, arranged in a perfect circle. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. They hadn't been there before. "Michael, look at this," he whispered. Michael crawled out of the tent and stared at the stones, his face pale. "What does it mean?" Before Daniel could answer, another sound echoed from the trees this time, a low, rumbling laugh, like someone or something mocking them from the darkness. It was enough to make their blood run cold. "Pack up. Now," Daniel ordered. They tore down the tent in record time, stuffing their gear into their backpacks. The laughter had stopped, but the uneasy feeling hadn't. They grabbed their things and started back the way they had come, not caring about the time of night. They just needed to get out. For hours, they stumbled through the forest in the dark, the trail long forgotten. The only thing guiding them was the overwhelming sense that they were being followed. By dawn, they had reached the edge of the forest. Exhausted and shaken, they collapsed near the trailhead. Neither of them spoke on the drive back to town. And when they finally got home, they made an unspoken pact never to speak of the trip again. But sometimes, late at night, Daniel would think back to that laugh, how it had sounded so human, yet so wrong. And every time he passed a pile of stones, perfectly arranged, he couldn't help but wonder if something or someone was still out there, waiting.